What does it mean to stand against the shadow when the shadow is older than the stars? In the deep places of the world where light forgets its name and hope is but a whisper, there are battles fought not for glory nor for victory, but for the mere chance that something good might endure. In the mines of Moria, beneath the weight of mountains, Gandalf the Grey faced a terror born of fire and darkness, a Balrog, a demon of the ancient world. This was no clash of swords or contest of might, but a reckoning of spirit, a collision of truths older than the bones of the earth. To understand this moment, we must not merely recount it, but journey into its heart as one might walk the hidden paths of Middle-earth, seeking the meaning woven into its stones and silences. The tale begins not in Moria, but in the quiet places of the soul where fear first takes root. Fear is not the absence of courage, but the shadow cast by it, a shadow that grows long in the presence of the unknown. For Gandalf the Wanderer, the bearer of light fear, was no stranger. He was no elf, ageless and unyielding, nor a man driven by the fleeting fire of mortality. He was Istari Amaya, clothed in flesh, sent by the Valar to kindle hope in a world ever tilting toward despair. Yet even he who had walked the paths of Middle-earth for centuries knew the weight of dread as he led the Fellowship into the dark. Moria was not a choice, but a necessity. The high passes of Caradhras had rejected them, the mountains' wrath, as cold and unyielding as the will of Sauron himself. The Fellowship. Frodo, Sam Merry Pippin, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir and Gandalf stood at the gates of Khazad-dûm, the ancient dwarf kingdom, now a tomb of forgotten glory. The doors inscribed with starlight and silver spoke of a time when the world was younger, when Durin's folk carved wonders from the living rock. But that time was gone. The air was heavy with loss, and the lake before the gates stirred with a malice that watched and waited. Gandalf stood before the doors, his staff a faint glow in the gathering dusk. Melon he spoke the word of opening, and the gates yielded. Yet there was no triumph in that moment, only the sinking certainty of what lay beyond. The Fellowship stepped into the dark, and the world above was forgotten. The silence of Moria was not the silence of peace, but of something vast and patient, something that had waited long in the deep. It was the silence of a world that had died, and yet refused to rest. To walk in Moria is to walk through the ruins of ambition. The dwarves, in their hunger for mithril, had delved too deep, unearthing a terror they could not name. Their halls, once lit by lanterns of crystal, were now cloaked in shadow, their pillars broken, their songs silenced. The Fellowship moved through these halls as pilgrims through a desecrated temple, their footsteps echoing like prayers. No one would answer. Gandalf's light, a frail star in the gloom, revealed only fragments of the past carvings of forgotten kings, stairways spiraling into nothingness, chasms that swallowed sound. Each step was a question. What is the cost of reaching too far? What is the price of waking? What should sleep? Gandalf knew the answer, though he did not speak it. He had seen the greed of dragons, the pride of men, the sorrow of elves. He knew that the Balrog was not merely a creature, but a consequence, a shadow born of the world's own hunger. It was a relic of Morgoth's wrath, a flame of Udun bound to the earth when the first wars of creation tore the heavens asunder. To face it was to face not only fire and whip, but the weight of ages, the accumulated sins of a world that had forgotten its maker. Yet Gandalf did not falter. To falter is to surrender, and surrender was a luxury he could not afford. The ring borne by Frodo was a burden heavier than any mountain, a temptation that whispered to every heart. It was the one forged in the fires of Mount Doom, a circle of gold that held the will of Sauron the enemy, who sought to unmake all that was good. The Fellowship was its shield, its bearer, its hope. But hope is a fragile thing, and in Moria it flickered like a candle in a storm. The Fellowship pressed on their path, a labyrinth of stone and sorrow. Gimli, son of Gluan, spoke of Durin's glory, his voice a mix of pride and grief. Legolas, keen-eyed and silent, moved like a shadow, his elven senses attuned to the unseen. Aragorn, heir of Isildur, bore the weight of his lineage, his sword a promise of battles yet to come. Boromir, proud and troubled, carried the hopes of Gondor, his heart torn between duty and desire. The hobbits Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin were small in stature but vast in courage, their loyalty a light that no darkness could fully extinguish. And Gandalf, their guide, was the flame that held them together, though he knew the cost of that fire. In the chamber of Mazarbul, they found the Book of Records, its pages brittle with age, its words a litany of despair. Drums, drums, in the deep it read, we cannot get out. The Fellowship stood in the presence of death, the bones of dwarves, scattered like leaves, their armor rusted, their dreams dust. Frodo's hand rested on the ring, its weight a silent scream. Gandalf read the final words of Balin, son of Fundin, who had come to reclaim Moria and found only doom. The air grew thick, the silence broke, and the drums began. They came from the deep, a pulse of malice, a rhythm older than time. The orcs were coming, their cries a jagged edge in the dark. The Fellowship barred the door, their weapons drawn, their hearts steeled. But Gandalf's eyes were elsewhere, searching the shadows, sensing a presence beyond the orcs, a terror that stirred in the abyss. The battle was swift and fierce, arrows flew, swords clashed, and the orcs fell. Yet the victory was hollow, for the drums did not cease. They grew louder, deeper, and with them came a heat that was not of this world. "Flee," Gandalf cried, and the Fellowship ran their footsteps, a desperate hymn. The halls of Moria twisted around them, a maze of stone and fire. The orcs pursued, their numbers swelling, but it was not the orcs that Gandalf feared. He felt it now, a shadow and flame, a power that had slumbered since the world was young. The Balrog was awake, and it was coming for them. To face the Balrog is to face the terror of the self. It is the mirror that shows not your face, but your failures, your doubts, your unspoken sins. For Gandalf, the Balrog was not merely a foe, but a question. What are you willing to sacrifice? He had guided the Fellowship through peril, had borne the light when all seemed lost. But now the light was fading, and the shadow was near. The ring, the Fellowship. The hope of Middle-earth, they rested on his shoulders, and the weight was crushing. The bridge of Khazad-dûm loomed ahead, a slender arc of stone spanning a chasm without end. It was the only way out, the only path to freedom. But freedom is never free, and the cost was yet to be paid. The Fellowship crossed the bridge, their breath ragged, their hope frayed. Gandalf lingered at the rear, his staff a beacon, his will a wall against the dark. And then it came. The Balrog rose from the depths, a storm of fire and shadow. Its wings were smoke, its eyes pits of flame, its whip a lash of molten fury. It was no mere beast, but a force, a remnant of the world's first wars, a servant of Morgoth who had defied the valor and sung discord into the music of Ilúvatar. It was Udun, the hell of fire, and it stood before Gandalf, a challenge not of flesh, but of spirit. The Fellowship froze, their eyes wide, their hearts stilled. Frodo clutched the ring, its whisper a scream in his mind. Aragorn and Boromir raised their swords, but their blades were as straw before a furnace. Legolas nocked an arrow, but his hands trembled. Gimli's axe was heavy in his grip, his pride humbled by the terror before them. The hobbits huddled together, their courage a flicker in the storm. And Gandalf stood alone, a grey pilgrim against a tide of flame. "You cannot pass," he said, his voice a thunder in the dark. It was not a plea nor a command, but a truth, as unyielding as the mountains. The Balrog roared its fire, surging its whip, cracking like lightning. The bridge trembled, the air burned, and the chasm yawned below. Gandalf raised his staff, and light poured forth, a star born in the deep, a defiance of the shadow. To stand against the Balrog is to stand against despair. It is to say in the face of overwhelming darkness that there is yet light worth fighting for. Gandalf did not fight for himself, nor for glory, nor for power. He fought for Frodo, for the ring, for the hope that a small hand might cast down a great evil. He fought for the fellowship, for the world they carried in their hearts. He fought because to do otherwise was to surrender, and surrender was the one path he could not take. The Balrog lunged its fire a wave, its shadow a void. Gandalf met it, his staff a spear of light, his will a shield of faith. The bridge cracked, the stone groaned, and the world held its breath. "You shall not pass," he cried, and the words were a song, a prayer, a vow. The Balrog's whip lashed out, but Gandalf's light held firm. The fire met the star, and the star did not yield. What does it mean to resist the darkness? It is not to deny fear, but to walk through it. It is not to seek victory, but to seek meaning. It is to stand when all seems lost and say, "I am here, and I will not be moved." Gandalf stood, and the Balrog faltered. The bridge shattered, the chasm opened, and the fire fell. But the whip caught Gandalf, and he too was pulled into the deep. The Fellowship watched their cries swallowed by the dark. Frodo's heart broke. Aragorn's resolve hardened, and the hobbits wept. Gandalf was gone, his light extinguished, his staff broken. The Balrog had taken him, and Moria had claimed its due. Yet the tale does not end here, for no light is truly lost, and no sacrifice is without echo. In the silence that followed, the Fellowship fled their path lit only by memory. They emerged into the light of day, but the light was cold, and the world was changed. Gandalf's fall was not merely a loss, but a question. What do we do when the guide is gone? What do we carry when the light fades? These are the questions that linger, the truths that burn. For the Balrog was not the only shadow, and Moria was not the only deep. To journey through Moria is to journey through the self. It is to face the fire, the fear, the weight of choices made and unmade. Gandalf faced the Balrog, not as a wizard, but as a soul, a spark of the divine clothed in grey. His stand was a song, a note in the music of Ilúvatar, a defiance of the discord that sought to unmake the world. And though he fell, his light endured a star that would shine again. The tale continues, as all tales do, in the hearts of those who carry it. The Fellowship moves on, the ring weighs heavier, and the shadow grows. But Gandalf's stand remains a moment of truth, a fire that does not die. What does it mean to resist the darkness? It is to be Gandalf on the bridge, to be the light, when all is flame, to be the voice that says, "You shall not pass." The light of day greeted the Fellowship as they stumbled from the gates of Moria, but it was a light that offered no warmth. The sun hung pale above the Dimril Dale, its rays glinting off the mirrored waters of the Mirrormere, yet it could not pierce the shadow that clung to their hearts. Gandalf was gone. The bridge had broken, the fire had fallen, and the grey pilgrim who had been their guide, their star in the dark, had been claimed by the abyss. The air was sharp with grief, and the silence that followed was not the silence of rest, but of a world unmoored, a song interrupted before its final note. To lose a guide is to lose more than a path. It is to lose the certainty that the path exists at all. For Frodo the ring-bearer, the weight of that loss was a chain added to the one already around his neck. The ring, that small circle of gold, pulsed with a life of its own, its whispers louder now, promising safety, power, rest, promises that were lies clad in truth. Sam, ever faithful, stood close, his eyes red, but resolute, his hand steady on Frodo's shoulder. Merry and Pippin, their hobbit hearts unaccustomed to such vast sorrow, wept openly, their small forms huddled against the stone. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, bore his grief like a king, his face a mask of duty, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. Legolas, whose elven soul saw further than most, gazed toward the mountains as if seeking a sign in the wind. Gimli, son of Gluan, clutched his axe, his pride humbled his voice, silenced by the memory of Moria's ruin. And Boromir proud, Boromir stood apart, his heart torn between sorrow and the growing hunger that the ring kindled in him. They could not linger. The orcs of Moria, though scattered, would not rest, and the shadow of the Balrog's fire lingered in the deep. Aragorn took up the mantle of leadership, his voice steady, though his heart was not. "We must move on," he said to Lothlorien, to the Lady of the Wood. "There we may find rest and counsel." The words were a command, but also a plea to believe that there was yet a path forward, that Gandalf's sacrifice had not been in vain. The journey to Lothlorien was a pilgrimage through a landscape of loss. The land of Hollin, once a realm of elven glory, lay barren, its stones cracked, its rivers silent. The Fellowship moved as shadows, their footsteps heavy, their thoughts heavier. Each carried a piece of Moria, a fragment of the dark that could not be left behind. For Frodo, it was the image of Gandalf on the bridge, his staff blazing, his voice a thunder that shook the foundations of the world. For Sam, it was the fear that he could not protect Frodo, that the burden of the ring would break the one he loved. For Aragorn, it was the weight of legacy, the knowledge that he must now lead where Gandalf had fallen. And for all, it was the question that hung unspoken. What does it mean to carry on when the light is gone? To carry on is to walk the razor's edge between hope and despair. It is to move forward when every step feels like betrayal, when the heart cries out to turn back, to mourn, to rest. Yet rest was not theirs to claim. The ring could not wait, and neither could the enemy. Sauron's eye was ever watchful, his will a fire that sought the ring sought. Frodo sought the end of all things. The Fellowship was a fragile thread, a single note in a song that could yet be silenced. And so they walked through the barren lands toward the Golden Wood, toward a hope they could not yet see. Lothlorien rose before them like a dream of the elder days. The malin trees, their leaves a cascade of gold, stood as sentinels of a world that had not yet forgotten its beauty. The air was alive with the scent of earth and blossom, and the light that filtered through the branches was not the light of sun or moon, but of something older, purer, a light that remembered the two trees of Valinor. The Fellowship entered the wood, and for a moment the shadow of Moria receded, though it did not vanish. They were met by the elves of Lorien, led by Haldir, whose eyes were keen and whose voice was soft but unyielding. "You bring great peril with you," he said, his gaze resting on Frodo, on the ring hidden beneath his cloak. The elves blindfolded Gimli, a precaution born of ancient mistrust, and the Fellowship followed their steps, guided by voices that sang of stars and sorrow. In the heart of Lorien they came to Caras Galadon, the city of the Galadrim, where the Lady Galadriel and Lord Celeborn held court. Galadriel was a vision of light and shadow, her hair a river of starlight, her eyes a mirror that saw into the soul. She was of the Noldor, a daughter of the West who had seen the light of the two trees and carried its memory through the ages. Her presence was a balm, but also a blade, for she saw the truth of each heart and spoke it without mercy. "The quest stands upon the edge of a knife," she said, her voice a melody that cut. "Stray but a little and it will fail to the ruin of all, yet hope remains while the company is true." Her words were a mirror, reflecting the fragility of their bond. Boromir shifted uneasily, his hand straying to his sword, his heart stirred by the ring's call. Aragorn met her gaze, his own truth laid bare, the fear that he was not enough, that the blood of Isildur would fail again. Frodo felt her eyes upon him, and the ring burned against his chest, its weight a fire that no water could quench. Galadriel's gaze lingered on him longest, and in her eyes he saw not judgment but sorrow, and a strength that was both terrible and kind. To stand before Galadriel is to stand before the truth of oneself. It is to see the desires that drive you, the fears that bind you, the hopes that sustain you. For Frodo, the truth was the ring, its burden a wound that grew with every step. For Aragorn, it was the legacy of his fathers, the sword that was broken and the throne that waited. For Boromir, it was the pride of Gondor, the desperation to save his people, and the temptation that whispered of a quicker path. And for all, it was the absence of Gandalf, the void, where his light had been. Galadriel offered them rest, and the Fellowship accepted, though rest was not peace. In the golden light of Lorien they mourned. Frodo wandered the paths alone, the ring, a constant companion, its voice louder in the silence. Sam followed his loyalty, a shield, his heart, a garden that refused to wither. Merry and Pippin found solace in the simple things, food, song, the laughter of elves. Yet their eyes were haunted, their innocence frayed. Legolas and Gimli forged a bond, their mistrust giving way to respect, a bridge built over the chasm of history. Aragorn sat in council with Celeborn, his mind on the path ahead, his heart on the one he had sworn to protect, Arwen the Evenstar, whose love was both his strength and his sorrow. And Boromir. Boromir wrestled with himself. The ring called to him not as a tool of evil, but as a weapon of good, a way to save Gondor, to honor his father, to be the hero his people needed. He saw it in his dreams, a golden circle that promised victory, and he woke with its name on his lips. Galadriel saw this, and in her mirror she showed him the truth, not the triumph he craved, but the ruin that followed. "It is not yours to take," she said, and her words were a wound, for they spoke of a choice he was not yet ready to make. The mirror of Galadriel was a mystery, a pool of water that showed things that were things that are, and things that might yet be. Frodo stood before it, his heart heavy, his mind clouded. The mirror showed him visions, a white tower, a black hand, a hobbit's face twisted in pain. It showed him Gandalf, not as he was, but as he might be cloaked in white, a flame reborn. The vision was fleeting, a whisper of hope, but it was enough. Frodo looked to Galadriel, and she nodded her eyes, a promise that the story was not yet done. To look into the mirror is to face the unknown, to see the threads of fate, and know that you cannot hold them all. For Frodo, the mirror was a reminder of the burden he carried, but also of the strength he did not yet know he possessed. For the Fellowship it was a moment of clarity, a pause before the storm. They rested in Lorien, but rest was not an end, only a preparation. The ring must move on, and with it the hope of Middle-earth. The elves of Lorien gave them gifts, cloaks woven of starlight boats to carry them down the Anduin Lembas to sustain them. Galadriel gave Frodo a phial, a crystal filled with the light of Arendil's star, a light to shine in dark places. "May it be a light to you," she said, "when all other lights go out." Her words were a blessing, but also a warning, for the path ahead was one of shadow, and the light of Lorien could not follow them forever. They left the golden wood, their boats gliding on the silver waters of the Anduin. The river was a mirror reflecting the sky, the mountains, the weight of their choices. Frodo sat at the prow, the phial in his hand, the ring against his heart. Sam watched him, his eyes never straying his love, a constant star. Aragorn steered, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his heart divided between duty and desire. Boromir's hands gripped the oars, his mind a battlefield, his soul teetering on the edge. The hobbits sang softly, their voices a thread of joy in the gathering dark. Legolas and Gimli shared a boat, their friendship a quiet victory, a promise that even in shadow light could grow. The river carried them south toward the falls of Rauros, toward a choice that would break the Fellowship. But the shadow of Moria lingered, and the fire of the Balrog burned in their memories. Gandalf's fall was not the end, but a turning, a moment where the world held its breath. What does it mean to carry on? It is to take the next step. Though the path is unseen, it is to hold the light though the dark is near. It is to be the Fellowship, broken but unbroken, a song that sings itself. The Anduin flowed and the world turned. In the deep places where fire and shadow met, Gandalf's story was not yet done. The Balrog had fallen, but so had he, into the abyss, into the silence that is not an end, but a beginning. To fall is not to fail, but to enter the mystery, to walk the paths that no map can show. Gandalf fell, and in falling he became something more, a flame refined, a light reborn. But that is a tale for another time, a song that waits in the wings. For now the Fellowship moves on their boats, small against the vastness of the river, their hearts heavy with loss, their hope a fragile flame. The ring whispers, the enemy watches, and the world waits. What does it mean to carry on? It is to be Frodo bearing the unbearable. It is to be Sam loving without question. It is to be Aragorn leading through doubt. It is to be the fellowship, a company of souls bound by a single truth, that even in the shadow there is yet light worth fighting for. The Anduin flowed like a vein of silver through the heart of Middle-earth, carrying the fellowship southward under a sky that held no answers. The river was both a guide and a judge, its current steady but relentless, urging them toward a horizon where choices waited like shadows. The boat's gifts of the elves of Lorien glided silently their prows, cutting through water that reflected the stars above and the doubts below. Frodo sat at the fore of one, the phial of Galadriel clutched in his hand, its faint glow a reminder of light that seemed now a distant memory. The ring hung heavy against his chest, its weight no longer just a burden, but a voice, a constant murmur that wove itself into his thoughts, promising rest power escape promises that were chains in disguise. Sam, ever watchful, sat close, his eyes tracing Frodo's face for signs of the strain that grew with each passing mile. His hands, rough from the Shire's fields, rested on the oars, but his heart was a garden steadfast, refusing to let the shadow take root. Aragorn steered with a hand that did not waver, though his mind was a storm of duty and desire. Duty to the ring, to Frodo, to the hope of Middle-earth. Desire for Arwen, for a life that might never be his. Boromir's oars dipped and rose, his strength unyielding, but his gaze was troubled, his soul a battlefield where pride and temptation clashed. Legolas and Gimli shared a boat, their unlikely bond, a quiet hymn, a bridge built over the ruins of ancient grudges. Merry and Pippin, their hobbit hearts bruised but unbroken, hummed softly, their voices a thread of innocence in a world that grew ever darker. The river was a mirror, but it showed no clear path. The shadow of Moria lingered not as a memory, but as a wound. Gandalf's fall on the bridge of Khazad-dûm was a fracture in their story, a moment where the world had tilted and not yet righted itself. His voice, "You shall not pass," echoed in their minds, a thunder that had shaken the deep, a light that had burned against the flame of Udun. Yet he was gone, and the absence was a question. What does it mean to carry the light when the bearer is lost? The fellowship bore that question as they bore the ring. Each step a choice to move forward, though the way was veiled in shadow. The Anduin carried them past the Argonath, the Pillars of the Kings, where colossal statues of Isildur and Anarion stood sentinel, their stone hands raised in warning or welcome. Aragorn gazed upon them, his heart stirred by the blood of his fathers, the legacy that both crowned and cursed him. The statues were a reminder of what had been a kingdom united, a hope unbroken, and what might yet be if the ring could be unmade. But they were also a warning, for Isildur had held the ring and failed to destroy it, his choice, a seed that had grown into the shadow now hunting them. Aragorn's hand tightened on the tiller, his resolve a blade honed by doubt. Boromir saw the Argonath and saw Gondor, his home, his heart. The statues were not just stone, but a call to arms, a reminder of the city he had sworn to defend. Minas Tirith, the White Tower, stood against the tide of Mordor, its walls battered, its people weary. Boromir's mind turned to his father Denethor, whose eyes were clouded by despair, and to his brother Faramir, whose heart was wiser but less favoured. The ring whispered to him not of evil, but of salvation, a weapon to save Gondor, to bring victory where defeat loomed. He shook his head as if to cast the thought away, but it clung a shadow that grew with the river's flow. Frodo felt the ring's call strongest of all. It was no longer a thing he carried, but a part of him, a weight that sank into his bones, his blood, his breath. In the quiet moments when the river's murmur was the only sound he heard, it spoke not in words, but in feelings, in visions of a world where he was strong, where he was free. Yet each vision ended in fire, in a red eye that saw all and spared nothing. Frodo's hand strayed to the phial, its light a faint pulse, a reminder of Galadriel's words, "When all other lights go out." But what did it mean to hold light when the dark was within? The river widened, its banks growing wild, the land untamed. The falls of Rauros loomed ahead, a roar in the distance, a point of no return. The Fellowship knew the choice that waited there to turn east toward Mordor, where the ring must be cast into the fires of Mount Doom, or west to Gondor, where strength might be rallied, but the ring's temptation would grow. Aragorn had delayed the decision, hoping for clarity for a sign. But signs are rare in the wild, and clarity is a luxury the heart cannot always afford. They camped on the western bank near the lawns of Parth Galen, where the grass was soft, but the air heavy with foreboding. The boats were drawn ashore, and a fire was kindled, its flames small against the vastness of the night. The Fellowship sat in a circle, their faces lit by flickering light, their thoughts a tangle of fear and hope. Aragorn spoke of the path ahead, his voice steady, but his eyes searching. "We cannot linger," he said. "The enemy's eye is upon us, and time is not our ally." His words were true, but they did not ease the tension that hung between them. Boromir's voice broke the silence, sharp with urgency. "Why do we not go to Gondor?" he asked, his eyes on Frodo, though he spoke to all. "There we can muster strength, fortify our cause. The ring could be used not for evil, but for good, to defeat Sauron, to save my people." His words were a plea, but also a challenge, and they stirred the air like a storm's first gust. Aragorn met his gaze, his own voice calm but unyielding. "The ring cannot be used. It is Sauron's, and it serves only him. To wield it is to become what we fight." His words were a truth, but they were also a wound, for they dismissed Boromir's hope, his desperation to save what he loved. Frodo said nothing, but his hand closed around the ring, its metal cold against his skin. He felt Boromir's eyes upon him, felt the weight of Gondor's need and the weight of his own fear. Sam watched his heart, aching, his hands itching to pull Frodo away, to shield him from the storm that was coming. Legolas and Gimli exchanged a glance, their bond a silent agreement to stand together whatever came. Merry and Pippin, sensing the rift, drew closer to Frodo, their loyalty a light that did not waver. The fire burned low and the night grew deep. Frodo rose, his voice soft but clear. "I need to think," he said, and he walked into the trees, seeking solitude, seeking silence. But silence is a rare gift, and the ring was never silent. Its whispers followed him, weaving doubt into every step. He climbed the slopes of Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, where ancient ruins stood like bones of a forgotten age. From its summit he could see the river, the falls, the vastness of the world, and he felt small, smaller than ever, a hobbit bearing a burden too great for kings. Boromir followed his steps, heavy, his heart heavier. He found Frodo among the ruins, standing alone, the ring a shadow around his neck. "Frodo," Boromir said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "you carry a great power. It could save us, save Gondor. Why do you hold it back?" His words were meant to persuade, but they carried an edge, a hunger that could not be hidden. Frodo turned his eyes, weary but resolute. "It cannot be used," he said, echoing Aragorn, but with a sorrow that cut deeper. "It would destroy us all." His voice was a plea not for Boromir to understand, but for the world to be different, for the burden to be lifted. Boromir's face darkened, his pride wounded, his hope twisted. "You would let Gondor fall," he said, stepping closer, his voice rising. "You, a halfling, would deny us salvation." The ring's whisper was in him now, not as a voice, but as a fire, a need that burned away reason. He reached for Frodo, not with malice, but with desperation, his hands grasping for the ring, for the hope it promised. Frodo stumbled back, fear flaring in his chest. He slipped the ring onto his finger, and the world changed. The air grew heavy, the light dimmed, and the eye of Sauron turned toward him, a red flame that saw all. Boromir's cries faded, replaced by a silence that was not peace, but terror. Frodo ran, invisible but not unseen, the ring, a beacon that called to the enemy. He tore it from his finger, gasping, and fell to the ground, his heart pounding, his hope frayed. Boromir stood alone, his hands empty, his soul laid bare. The fire in him cooled, and in its place came shame, a tide that drowned his pride. He fell to his knees, weeping not for the ring, but for what he had become. "What have I done?" he whispered, and the words were a prayer, a plea for forgiveness that might never come. The fellowship scattered, the storm breaking over them. Orcs drawn by the ring's call swarmed from the east, their cries a jagged edge in the air. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fought their blades a dance of defiance, but the tide was relentless. Merry and Pippin ran into the trees, their courage small but fierce, drawing the orcs away from Frodo. Sam searched for Frodo, his heart a compass that would not fail. Frodo reached the river, the boats waiting like promises unkept. He climbed into one, his hands trembling, his mind a storm of fear and resolve. He would go to Mordor alone to spare the fellowship, to carry the ring where it must go. But Sam found him splashing through the water, his voice a cry that cut through the dark. "I made a promise, Mr. Frodo," he said, his eyes fierce with love. "Don't you leave me." And Frodo's heart broke, and he reached out, pulling Sam into the boat. They set off, two hobbits against the vastness of the world, the ring between them, the falls roaring ahead. The fellowship was broken, its members scattered, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fighting to save Merry and Pippin. Boromir fallen to his shame, his redemption uncertain. Frodo and Sam alone on the river, their path a thread of hope in a tapestry of shadow. Yet the story does not end here, for no breaking is final, no loss complete. In the deep places of Moria, where Gandalf had fallen, a fire still burned. The Balrog had dragged him into the abyss, but the abyss was not an end, only a passage. Gandalf the Grey Pilgrim had faced the flame of Udun, not as a man, but as a spark of the divine, a Maya sent by Ilúvatar to kindle light in the dark. His fall was a descent, but also a forging, a refining of the soul in the fires of trial. In the depths where time was a dream and the world a memory, Gandalf fought. The Balrog was no mere foe, but a force, a remnant of Morgoth's discord, a shadow that sought to unmake the music of creation. Their battle was not of swords or spells, but of will, of truth against despair. They fell through chasms without name, through waters that drowned light, through fires that burned stone. They climbed the endless stair, a spiral of stone that wound from the roots of the world to the peaks of Ziraxigil. There, under the open sky, they clashed, fire against light, shadow against star. Gandalf's staff was broken, his body weary, but his spirit was a flame that would not die. He called upon the secret fire, the flame of Ainur, the light of Ilúvatar that burns at the heart of the world. The Balrog faltered, its fire dimming, its shadow shrinking. With a final cry, Gandalf struck, and the demon fell, its body a ruin, its power broken. But the cost was great. Gandalf too fell, his light fading, his breath stilled. Yet death is not the end, not for one sent by the valor. In that moment Gandalf passed beyond the circles of the world to a place where time is not, where the music of Ilúvatar sings without ceasing. There he was judged not by his failures but by his faith, his sacrifice, his unwavering stand against the dark. He was sent back not as Gandalf the Grey but as Gandalf the White, a flame reborn, a light refined. His task was not done, his song not finished. The fellowship did not know this, could not know it, as they faced their own trials. Frodo and Sam rowed toward Mordor, their boat a speck in the vastness of the river. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli pursued the orcs, their hearts set on saving Merry and Pippin. Boromir, alone with his shame, sought redemption in battle, his sword a vow to be better. The world turned and the shadow grew, but the light of Gandalf's stand lingered, a note that echoed in the hearts of those who carried on. What does it mean to be broken? It is to stand at the edge of loss and choose to move forward. It is to bear the ring though it burns. It is to love though the cost is great. It is to fight though the battle seems lost. The fellowship was broken, but its pieces were not scattered. They were seeds planted in the dark, waiting for light to call them forth. Gandalf's fall was a seed, his battle a song, and his return a promise that no night is eternal. The river flowed and the world waited. Frodo and Sam faced the east, their path a fire that only they could walk. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ran west, their hope a blade that would not dull. Boromir stood, his heart heavy, his soul seeking, and in the deep Gandalf rose, a white flame against the shadow, a light that would shine again. What does it mean to carry on? It is to be the fellowship broken but bound, a song that sings through the dark, a hope that does not die. The river parted ways with the fellowship, its silver thread unravelling into the vastness of Middle-earth, where hope and despair walked hand in hand. Frodo and Sam, two hobbits, small against the weight of the world, rowed their boat toward the eastern shore, the falls of Rauros, a fading roar behind them. The ring hung heavy on Frodo's neck, its whispers now a chorus weaving doubt and fear into every breath. Sam, his heart a steadfast root, watched Frodo with eyes that saw not just the ring-bearer, but the friend he had sworn to follow through fire, through shadow, through the end of all things. Their path led to Mordor, to the fire of Mount Doom, where the ring could be unmade, but the road was a wound, and each step bled hope. Across the wildlands, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ran, their hearts set on Merry and Pippin, carried off by orcs toward Isengard. The plains of Rohan stretched before them, a sea of grass under a sky that held no mercy. Aragorn, heir of Isildur, led with a will of iron, though his soul was a storm of guilt and duty, guilt for the fellowship's breaking duty to those who remained. Legolas, his elven senses sharp as starlight, scanned the horizon, his heart attuned to the rhythm of the world. Gimli, his axe, a vow, matched their pace, his grief for Gandalf, a fire that drove him forward. They were hunters now, chasing a faint hope, their steps, a prayer that the hobbits yet lived. Boromir alone on the slopes of Path Galen stood amid the bodies of orcs, his sword bloodied, his heart broken. He had fought to protect Merry, and Pippin had poured his strength into a redemption he could not fully claim. The horn of Gondor, split by an orc's blade, lay at his feet, its call silenced like the pride that had led him to the ring's temptation. His shame was a chasm, but in that shame he found a truth: to fall is not to fail, but to be given a chance to rise. He staggered toward the river, seeking Aragorn, seeking forgiveness, seeking a way to make his life a shield for others. The shadow of Moria lingered in them all, not as a place, but as a moment when Gandalf had stood against the Balrog, his light a star in the deep, his voice a thunder that defied the dark. His fall was a wound that had not healed, a question that echoed in every choice. What does it mean to stand when the world is fire and shadow? The fellowship was broken, its pieces scattered, yet each piece carried a spark of that stand, a note of Gandalf's song that refused to fade. Frodo and Sam reached the Emyn Muil, a labyrinth of jagged stone where the earth itself seemed to conspire against them. The cliffs rose like teeth, the paths twisted like lies, and the air was heavy with the scent of ash. Frodo's steps were slow, his eyes haunted the ring, a weight that bent his spine. Sam carried their pack, his hands steady, his heart a garden where hope refused to wither. He spoke of the Shire of green fields and warm hearths, not to distract, but to remind Frodo of what they fought for. "There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice a light in the gloom, "and it's worth fighting for." Their journey was a descent not just into Mordor, but into the self. The ring was no mere object, but a mirror showing Frodo his fears, his doubts, his desires. It promised power not to rule, but to protect, to save the Shire, to spare his friends, to be enough. Yet each promise was a trap, each vision a chain. Frodo saw Bilbo's face, twisted by the ring's hunger. He saw Gandalf's fall, a light swallowed by flame. He felt the eye of Sauron, a red gaze that sought him across the miles, its will, a fire that burned through stone and soul. Sam saw Frodo's struggle and bore it as his own. He could not carry the ring, but he could carry Frodo, could hold the light when Frodo's flickered. His love was not a grand thing, not a song of kings or elves, but a quiet thing, a root that held fast in the storm. He cooked meals from their dwindling supplies, sang songs of hobbit lore, and watched the stars when Frodo slept, as if their light could guard him. To love is to stand in the shadow and not turn away to see the dark, and still choose the light. Sam stood, and in his standing Frodo found the strength to walk. In the Emyn Muil they were not alone. Gollum, the creature who had once been Smeagol, followed his eyes like lamps in the dark, his heart a ruin of want and woe. The ring had made him, had broken him, had bound him to its will across centuries. He was a shadow of Frodo, a warning of what the ring could do, yet also a mystery, for in his wretchedness there lingered a spark of something human, something that remembered love. Frodo felt this, though he could not name it, and when they captured Gollum, he chose pity over death, a choice that echoed Gandalf's words. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Gollum swore to serve his oath on the precious, a twisted vow, his loyalty a thread that could snap at any moment. He led them through the Emyn Muil, his knowledge of hidden paths a gift and a danger. Frodo watched him, seeing not just a guide, but a mirror, a question. What does it mean to be bound? Gollum was bound to the ring as Frodo was, but where Gollum had fallen. Frodo still stood his hope a fragile flame, his pity, a strength he did not yet understand. Across the plains of Rohan, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli pursued the orcs their hope, a fire that burned through exhaustion. The land was wide, the trail faint, but they did not falter. Legolas saw signs in the wind. Gimli read the earth's story, and Aragorn followed a sense deeper than sight, a call of the heart that said the hobbits lived. They ran through day and night, their bodies weary, but their spirits unbowed, for to stop was to surrender, and surrender was a path they could not take. They met Eomer, nephew of Theoden, king of Rohan, leading a company of riders. The Rohirrim were a people of horse and spear, their hearts proud, their land troubled by the shadow of Saruman, the wizard who had fallen to the enemy's will. Eomer spoke of orcs slain of a battle in the night, but no word of hobbits. His eyes were wary, his trust thin, yet he gave them horses, a gift that spoke of honour. Aragorn thanked him, his voice a king's, though his heart was a ranger's, heavy with the weight of those he could not save. The trail led to Fangorn Forest, a place of ancient trees and older secrets, where the air was thick with memory and the ground alive with whispers. The orcs were dead, their bodies scattered, but Merry and Pippin were gone, their fate a mystery. Aragorn knelt reading the signs, his heart caught between hope and fear. Legolas sensed a presence not of orcs, but of something deeper, something that watched from the shadows of the leaves. Gimli gripped his axe, his courage a shield against the unknown. They followed the trail into the forest, their steps a prayer, their hope a star in the dark. In Fangorn, Merry and Pippin had found refuge not in chains, but in the branches of Treebeard, an Ent, a shepherd of trees whose voice was the rumble of earth, whose eyes held the sorrow of ages. The Ents were ancient, their lives measured in centuries, their anger slow but unyielding. Merry and Pippin, small and young, stirred something in Treebeard, a memory of purpose, a call to act. They spoke of Saruman, of his betrayal of the trees he had burned. Treebeard listened, and the forest listened with him, a chorus of roots and leaves that began to hum with wrath. Boromir found Aragorn at the river's edge, his strength spent, his life ebbing. He spoke of his failure of the ring of Merry and Pippin. "I have failed you," he said, his voice a whisper, his eyes seeking forgiveness. Aragorn knelt beside him, his hand on Boromir's shoulder, his voice steady but soft. "No, Boromir, you have fought bravely. You have kept your honour." The words were a balm, but also a truth, for Boromir had fallen, but in falling he had risen, his last act, a shield for those he loved. Boromir's breath faded, and with it the horn of Gondor was silent. Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli sent his body down the Anduin in a boat, a warrior's farewell, his sword on his chest, his shield at his side. They stood in silence, their grief a river that joined the one before them. Boromir was gone, but his stand, his redemption, was a light that lingered, a note in the song of the fellowship that would not be forgotten. In the deep places of the world, Gandalf's story continued, though none knew it. His battle with the Balrog had ended on the peak of Ziraxagil, the demon slain, its fire extinguished. But Gandalf too had fallen, his body broken, his light dimmed. Yet he was not forsaken. Beyond the circles of the world, in a place where the music of Ilúvatar sings without end, he was called, judged, and sent back. He was no longer Gandalf the Grey, but Gandalf the White, a flame refined, a light reborn to guide Middle-earth in its darkest hour. He awoke on the mountain, the cold air sharp, the stars above a hymn of return. His task was not done, his purpose not fulfilled. The ring was still abroad, the enemy's shadow growing, and the fellowship scattered. Gandalf rose his staff, new forged his heart, a fire that burned for hope. He descended the mountain, his steps guided by a will beyond his own, toward Fangorn, toward the world that needed him. The threads of the fellowship converged, though they did not yet know it. Frodo and Sam, led by Gollum, reached the Dead Marshes, a place of rot and memory, where the faces of the fallen stared from the water, their eyes a warning, their silence a weight. The marshes were a mirror not of the future, but of the past, of battles fought and lost, of choices that lingered like ghosts. Frodo felt the ring's pull, its voice louder in the stillness. But he felt Sam's hand too, a warmth that anchored him. Gollum watched his heart torn between service and betrayal, his soul a battlefield where the ring still ruled. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, deep in Fangorn, found not Merry and Pippin, but a figure cloaked in white, a light that burned through the shadows. They thought him Saruman, their hands on their weapons, their hearts wary. But the figure spoke, and his voice was a thunder. They knew a star they had mourned. "I am Gandalf," he said, "and I have returned." The words were a dawn, a breaking of the dark, a promise that no fall is final, no light truly lost. Gandalf the White was not the Grey, yet he was the same, a guide, a flame, a will that defied the shadow. He spoke of his battle of the Balrog, of the deep places where fire and light had clashed. He spoke of Merry and Pippin safe with the Ents, and of the war that grew in the west, where Saruman's treachery threatened Rohan. He spoke of Frodo and Sam, their path, a fire that only they could walk, and of the ring, a burden that could not be shared but could be guarded. His return was a turning, a moment where the song of the fellowship found its melody again. What does it mean to return? It is to be broken and made whole, to fall and rise to carry the light, though the dark has claimed you. Gandalf's stand against the Balrog was not just a battle, but a forging, a refining of the soul in the fires of sacrifice. His return was not a resolution, but a revelation that the story continues, that the shadow is not eternal, that the music of Ilúvatar sings even in the deep. The fellowship was scattered, but its heart was not lost. Frodo and Sam walked the marshes, their hope a fragile flame, their love a shield. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli followed Gandalf their path now toward Edoras, to rouse Rohan against the shadow. Merry and Pippin with the Ents stirred a wrath that would shake the roots of Isengard. Boromir was gone, but his redemption lived a light in the hearts of those who mourned him. The ring moved closer to Mordor, the enemy's eye turned, and the world held its breath. To stand against the shadow is to be Gandalf on the bridge, to be Frodo in the marshes, to be Sam in the dark. It is to be Aragorn leading through doubt, Legolas seeing through the storm, Gimli fighting through grief. It is to be Merry and Pippin, small but unyielding, Boromir fallen but redeemed. It is to be the fellowship, broken but bound, a song that sings through fire and shadow, a hope that burns when all seems lost. The story continues, as all stories do, in the hearts of those who carry it, in the light that shines when all other lights go out. The world of Middle-earth turned under a sky heavy with the weight of choices, its rivers and mountains bearing witness to a story that sang of light and shadow. The fellowship, though broken, was not silenced. Its pieces moved through the wild, each carrying a spark of the fire that Gandalf had kindled on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. His stand against the Balrog, A clash of flame and star was not a moment lost to the deep, but a note that echoed in every heart that refused to yield. Now, as the ring drew closer to its unmaking, the song of the fellowship swelled a melody of hope, woven through despair of love, tested by fire of faith that burned when all seemed ash. Frodo and Sam. Two hobbits, small against the vastness of Mordor's shadow, trudged through the dead marshes, where the earth was a grave and the air thick with the sorrow of ages. The faces of the fallen stared from the water, their eyes empty, their silence a weight that pressed against the soul. Frodo's steps were heavy, the ring a chain that sank into his bones, its whispers now a storm promising power, safety rest promises that were lies clad in longing. Sam walked beside him, his heart a root that held fast, his eyes tracing Frodo's face for the light that flickered but did not die. Gollum, their guide, and their shadow slunk ahead, his eyes like lamps in the gloom, his soul a battlefield where the ring's will clashed with a faint memory of Smeagol the hobbit he had once been. The marshes were a trial not of strength but of spirit. Each step was a choice to move forward, though the path was a wound and the horizon of fire. Frodo felt the eye of Sauron, a red gaze that hunted him across the miles, its will a flame that sought the ring and the soul that bore it. The phial of Galadriel clutched in his hand was a faint pulse, a reminder of her words, a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. Yet the dark was within him now. The ring, a mirror that showed not his face but his fears. Bilbo's hunger, Gandalf's fall, the Shire burning under a black hand. Sam saw this, and his love was a shield, a quiet strength that spoke in small acts, a shared bite of Lembas, a song of the Shire's green hills, a hand steady on Frodo's arm when the ground betrayed him. Gollum's presence was a riddle, a shadow that both led and threatened. His oath on the precious bound him to Frodo, but the ring's call was a chain he could not break. He muttered to himself, his voice a hiss of want and woe, his eyes straying to the ring with a hunger that was both pitiful and perilous. Frodo watched him not with hatred but with pity, for Gollum was a mirror of what the ring could do, a warning of the abyss that waited. Sam watched Gollum too, his trust thinner than a blade, his heart set on protecting Frodo from the creature's betrayal. To walk with Gollum was to walk with the past, to carry the weight of choices made and unmade, to see the cost of desire and the faint hope of redemption. In the west, Gandalf the White led Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli toward Edoras, the golden hall of Rohan, where Theoden, king of the Riddermark, sat under the shadow of Saruman's treachery. Gandalf's return was a dawn, a breaking of the dark, his light refined by the fires of Moria, his will a flame that burned for hope. He was no longer the grey, the wanderer cloaked in doubt, but the white, a beacon sent back by Ilúvatar to guide Middle-earth in its darkest hour. His staff was new-forged, his heart a star, yet he carried the memory of the Balrog of the deep places, where fire and light had clashed, where he had fallen and risen, a soul forged anew. Rohan was a land of horse and spear, its people proud but weary, their fields scarred by orc raids, their king dimmed by the whispers of Wormtongue Saruman's servant. Gandalf entered the hall like a storm, his voice a thunder that broke the spell of despair. "Awake, Theoden, son of Thengel," he said, and his words were a call, a light that pierced the shadow. Theoden rose, his eyes, clearing, his heart kindled, and the hall rang with the song of a king reborn. Aragorn stood at Gandalf's side, his presence a promise of the king who might yet come, his sword a vow to stand against the dark. Legolas and Gimli, their bond a quiet hymn, watched the awakening, their hearts lifted by the fire of hope. Yet hope was not victory, and the shadow of Saruman grew. His armies of orcs and wild men marched on Rohan, their fires burning in the night, their drums a pulse of war. Gandalf rode to rally the scattered Rohirrim, his white cloak a banner, his voice a call that stirred the blood. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stayed with Theoden, their path leading to Helm's Deep, the fortress where Rohan would make its stand. The Deep was a stronghold of stone, its walls a shield, its horn a defiance, yet no wall could hold back the tide of despair that came with Saruman's host. In Fangorn, Merry and Pippin walked with Treebeard, their small voices stirring the ancient wrath of the Ents. The forest was alive, its trees a chorus of memory and anger, their roots deep in the earth, their branches heavy with the sorrow of ages. Treebeard spoke of Saruman's betrayal of the trees he had burned, the streams he had poisoned. Merry and Pippin, though young, carried a spark of Gandalf's light, a courage that spoke of small hands changing the world. The Ents marched their steps a quake, their voices a storm toward Isengard, where Saruman's tower of Orthanc stood a spike of pride that would soon be humbled. The threads of the fellowship wove together, though the pattern was unseen. Frodo and Sam, led by Gollum, left the marshes for the slag heaps of Ithilien, a land of green and silver, where the air was sweet, but the shadow of Mordor loomed. They met Faramir Boromir's brother, captain of Gondor's rangers, whose eyes were wise and whose heart was kind. Faramir saw the ring, felt its call, but turned from it, his choice a light that honoured his brother's fall. "I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway," he said, and his words were a balm to Frodo, a reminder that not all hearts were swayed by power. Faramir gave them provisions, counsel, and a path, but he could not shield them from the road ahead. The road led to Cirith Ungol, a pass of shadow and stone, where Shelob, a creature of hunger and malice, wove her webs. Gollum's betrayal was a knife, his loyalty to the ring stronger than his oath to Frodo. He led them into the trap, his heart a ruin, his hope of reclaiming the precious, a fire that burned away Smeagol's last spark. Frodo faced Shelob, the phial of Galadriel in his hand, its light a star that burned through the dark. Alia, he cried the elven word, a prayer, and the light flared, driving Shelob back. But her sting found him, and Frodo fell, his body still, his light dimmed. Sam, his heart breaking, took up the ring, not for power, but for love. He carried Frodo, bore the ring, faced the orcs of Cirith Ungol, with a courage that was not grand, but true. His love was a flame, a light that shone when all others failed. He rescued Frodo, returned the ring, and together they walked on two hobbits in a land of ash and fire, their hope a thread that would not break. In the west, the Battle of Helm's Deep raged, a storm of steel and fire. Aragorn fought his sword a beacon, his heart a king's, though he bore a ranger's doubt. Legolas, his arrows, a song stood at his side, his elven grace a light in the dark. Gimli, his axe, a vow hewed through the enemy, his courage a fire that burned for his friends. Theoden led the Rohirrim, his spear a defiance, his voice a call that rallied the weary. The night was long, the walls breached, the hope faint, but Gandalf came a white rider at dawn with Eomer and the Rohirrim, their charge a thunder that broke the enemy's line. The horn of Helm's Deep sounded, and the shadow fled. Isengard fell to the Ents, its walls torn by root and stone, its fires quenched by the river's wrath. Merry and Pippin stood with Treebeard, their small hands stirring a tide that humbled Saruman's pride. Orthanc remained a tower of unyielding stone, but Saruman was trapped, his power broken, his voice a shadow of its former strength. The Ents watched, their patience a judgment, their wrath a promise that the earth would not forget. Gandalf rode to Minas Tirith, the White City, where Denethor, steward of Gondor, sat in despair, his heart clouded by the Palantir's lies. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli followed their path, now the paths of the dead, where Aragorn, heir of Isildur, called the Oathbreakers to fulfill their vow. His will was a flame, his sword a truth, and the dead followed a shadow that would fight for light. The war grew, Sauron's armies marched, and the world stood on the edge of a knife. Frodo and Sam reached the slopes of Mount Doom, their bodies weary, their souls worn thin. The ring was a fire, its weight, a mountain, its voice, a scream that promised everything and gave nothing. Frodo faltered, his hope a flicker, but Sam carried him his love, a strength that defied the dark. At the crack of doom, Frodo stood, the ring in his hand, the fire below, a call to end the burden. But the ring's will was strong, and Frodo claimed it, his voice a whisper that shook the world. The ring is mine. Gollum, ever bound, lunged his hunger, a blade that cut both ways. He took the ring, but fell into the fire, his joy a scream, his end a mercy. The ring was unmade, its power broken, Sauron's eye extinguished. The tower of Barad-dûr crumbled, the land of Mordor shook, and the world was changed. Frodo and Sam, spared by the eagles, were carried from the fire, their task done, their hearts heavy with the cost. What does it mean to stand against the shadow? It is to be Gandalf, a light that burns through the deep, a flame that falls and rises. It is to be Frodo, bearing the unbearable, choosing pity over power. It is to be Sam, loving without question, carrying the light when it fades. It is to be Aragorn, leading through doubt, claiming a throne not for glory, but for hope. It is to be Legolas and Gimli, building a bridge over history's wounds. It is to be Merry and Pippin, small but unyielding, stirring the wrath of ancients. It is to be Boromir, fallen, but redeemed, a shield for those he loved. The Fellowship stood, though the world was fire and shadow. Gandalf's stand against the Balrog was a seed, its roots deep in the hearts of those who carried on. The ring was unmade, but the story did not end, for no story truly ends. Frodo returned to the Shire, but the Shire was not the same, for he was not the same. He sailed to the west, to the undying lands, seeking peace, leaving Sam to tend the garden he had fought for. Aragorn became king, his love for Arwen a light that burned through the ages. Legolas and Gimli, their bond unbroken, sought new paths, their friendship a song that lingered. Merry and Pippin, grown in courage, carried the Shire's heart. Gandalf, his task done, sailed with Frodo, his light, a star that faded into memory. To stand is to sing, though the song is sorrow and joy, fire and light. The Balrog was a shadow, but Gandalf was a star, and his stand was a note that echoed through the ages. The Fellowship was a song, its melody woven through the deep places, its harmony, a hope that did not die. What does it mean to stand? It is to be the light when all other lights go out, to be the voice that says, "You shall not pass," to be the heart that carries on, though the world is flame and shadow. The song fades, but its echo remains, a whisper of starlight, a memory of fire, a truth that sings forever.